In my opening speech, I remarked that there are really two avenues to a knowledge of Jesus' resurrection, the historical and the experiential. And tonight we've been primarily preoccupied with the historical. I've argued first that there are four historical facts which any adequate historical hypothesis must account for, and that second, the best explanation of those facts is that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, I don't think that we've seen any of those four facts refuted today. The majority of scholars, in fact, do agree with the arguments that I gave for Jesus' honorable burial by Joseph of Arimathea, for the fact that the tomb was found empty, for the appearances of Jesus to various individuals and groups, and for the origin of the disciples' belief in Jesus' resurrection. Dr. Ehrman's dropped his argument based on the inconsistencies in the narratives, as I showed that those lie in the peripheral details, not at the heart of the narratives, and that we have a remarkable harmonious account of these four fundamental facts. His only point that remained in the last speech was with respect to the women's role, and again I would simply suggest that as women disciples of Jesus who are faithful to Jesus and involved in his support and following him, they don't represent marginalized people. And besides that, is independently attested. This is not a mark and feature, remember. We have multiple independent sources of the women's role in the discovery of Jesus' empty tomb. So what about that second crucial contention that the resurrection of Jesus is the best explanation? I showed how the argument based on probability that he gives over and over again in his written word is fallacious. And he says, well, Hume isn't talking about my argument, he's talking about the impossibility of miracles. That is simply mistaken. Hume's argument is against the identification of miracles based upon their improbability. And that doesn't answer my fundamental point, that he cannot say the resurrection of Jesus is improbable, because he says the historian can't make judgments about that sort of thing. And even if it were improbable, he's got to consider all of the other evidence that would outbalance that. Now he says, well, look at these other hypotheses. Perhaps, for example, family members of Jesus stole the body. Isn't that more probable? Well, I don't think so. Notice there's no motive in that case for stealing the body. The family members of Jesus didn't believe in him during his lifetime. Nobody else other than Joseph and his servants and the women disciples even knew where the body had been interred. The time was insufficient for such a conspiracy to be hatched and launched between Friday night and Sunday morning. Also, the grave clothes in the tomb disprove the hypothesis of tomb robbery. Nobody would undress the body before taking it away. His conspiracies like this always come to light. His Roman guards would have been happy to inform the Jewish leaders of what had happened. And this hypothesis can't explain either the appearances of Jesus nor the origin of the Christian belief in his resurrection. So for all those reasons, that's an improbable hypothesis. By contrast, I don't think he's shown any improbability in saying God raised Jesus from the dead. All he says is that this appeals to God and that historians can't infer God. But remember, I gave three responses to that. First, as in physical science, you don't have to have direct access to explanatory entities in order to infer them. Secondly, the historian's whole project is dealing with the inaccessible past, where you have to infer things based on present evidence, even though you don't have direct access. And thirdly, this isn't a debate about what historians can do professionally. It's a debate about whether there's historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection and the conclusions that we can draw. And even if a professional historian can't draw that conclusion in a historical journal or a classroom, he can draw it when he goes home to his wife. And we can draw it if we think that the evidence is best explained in that way too. In short, I don't think that there's any good reason for thinking that the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is not best explained by the resurrection. And I want to conclude now just by saying something about that other avenue to a knowledge of the resurrection, that experiential approach. You see, if Christ is really risen from the dead, as the evidence indicates, then that means that Jesus is not just some ancient figure in history or a picture on a stained glass window. It means that he is alive today and can be known experientially. For me, Christianity ceased to be just a religion or a code to live by when I gave my life to Christ and experienced a spiritual rebirth in my own life. God became a living reality to me. The light went on where before there was only darkness, and God became an experiential reality, along with an overwhelming joy and peace and meaning that he imparted to my life. And I would simply say to you, if you're looking for that sort of meaning, purpose in life, then look not only at the historical evidence, but also pick up the New Testament, begin to read it, and ask yourself whether or not this could be the truth. I believe that it can change your life in the same way that it's changed mine.